Welcome to the Cyber Agony Aunt podcast series, brought to you by your very own cyber aunties, me, Amelia Hewitt.
And me, Rebecca Taylor. We're here to tackle the most pressing questions that arise throughout your cyber career with a selection of very special guests.
Think of us as your very own mentors, confidants, and cheerleaders, your agony aunts for surviving your career.
Hello, team, and welcome back to the Cyber Agony Aunt podcast. It's lovely to be back with you again.
I know, it feels like it's been so long.
I know, but we're back, we're here, and this time we're bringing lots of lovely guests with us. Now I'm going to throw out a phrase that Amelia isn't too comfortable with, but today we're going to be talking about podcrafting.
And what is podcrafting?
I feel like a middle-aged lady. So we're going to be talking about what it's like to make a podcast, how it feels, what to expect, because we've had lots of lovely people reach out with questions, asking how we got into it, where to go, what to look for. And so to help us with that conversation, I've brought along a special friend. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Callum. I'm the sales director here at Matinee Multilingual, and I've had the pleasure in hosting you both for the recording of this podcast. So I feel really blessed and honoured that you guys have invited me on.
Of course. Who else would we ask?
Well, you might ask Brian, but I think he prefers recording the podcast than being behind the mic, but who knows?
So to dig straight in, what's life like hosting all these podcasts and life at Matinee?
So I'll give you a bit of background about me to give a bit of context. I've been at Matinee for coming up to 7 years. Matinee's been going over 40. And in this studio that we're recording in, we've had thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of recording, from e-learning material all the way through to some of the UK's best known adverts, podcasts, all those kind of things. So we have our own podcast that we do, which celebrates that, called You're in Studio One. So that's the kind of day-to-day of organising all these recordings. People get in touch. We do it in multiple languages, hence the multilingual. And people come into the studio and record what is required for whatever medium it's going on. So as we always say in job interviews, no 2 days are the same, because while you're sending out quotes, doing project management stuff, the mediums of what you're working on and the end product are always so varied. So it's very entertaining, even with podcasts as well, that when people come in, it's always different subjects, really interesting to sit in here and just listen to what people would have to say. So it's quite an interesting place day to day.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds more interesting than cybersecurity, but I think what I'm keen to know, and probably what everyone listening is keen to know, is firstly, what makes a good podcast, but also, have you ever seen it go really wrong? And I don't mean us 5 minutes ago.
I think what makes a good podcast, I think that's quite a subjective thing, because I think a lot of people will be listening to podcasts and looking to get something out of it, which is different from what someone else might want to get from it. So for me, what makes a good podcast is kind of a thoughtful layout and a dedicated niche of what you're speaking about. I think there's a danger for podcasts to be too open, too wide. And actually, when you've got, like this podcast, a narrowed in specific subject that you're talking about, you can really engage with that audience and it resonates with that specific audience, which means that when you're having your meaningful conversations, like all of your podcasts to date, it resonates with people who really understand what you're talking about. I think if you try to go for too wide a reach, that's where you start to lose people, and it loses what you might be trying to achieve. So I think that's the first thing, is kind of really have a subject that you are passionate about and want to talk about in depth, and a well-structured conversation. And that's what really makes a good podcast. The other side is the technical aspect of podcasting. One thing that really grinds my gears when I'm listening to podcasts and going into anything going horribly wrong is really bad audio quality. And I think a lot of people these days, because of the rise of podcasts, social media, these kind of clickbait clips that you see on TikTok and Instagram Reels and stuff, they kind of forget the number one rule of podcasting is that it is audio. It's not about video. It's not about social media clips. It's not all this. It's about an audio program that someone doesn't have to listen to live on radio, that they can obtain through on demand. And so we pride ourselves in our studio that we've got an amazing recording studio with top of the range microphones and headphones and professional audio engineers that can make it sound the best that it can, so that the quality of what you're listening to does not take away from the subject and the importance of what you're speaking about. And so this kind of leads me on, if I've never seen a podcast go horribly wrong. There's lots of people who need lots of takes or need a bit longer to go through their pre-written scripts and things like that. And that's absolutely fine. That's part of recording. That's what happens with professional voice artists or actors or anything like that. Everyone needs a couple of goes. But I've listened to quite a few podcasts before where I've seen they've got a guest on and I'm really excited to hear them, but they've invited them over Zoom and they're using a laptop microphone and it's crackly. They're saying, oh, I'm in an airport and my internet is rubbish. And you suddenly go from what could be a really profound conversation with something that's really interesting to listening to something that you're like, I can't listen to this. It's crackly. I can't absorb what they're saying. And so the whole essence of what you're trying to achieve has been knocked by the fact that you don't have the technical setup to really achieve what you're looking to do. And so that's what I would say, is that trying to make diaries work to ensure that you're in a good recording space is one of the foundations that will lead to a really, really good conversation that your listeners aren't having to worry about crackles or sounds or getting distracted by that. So that kind of, those are my kind of good and bad.
I suppose reflecting on two things that you said, I think one of the most important things, especially that Amelia and I have experienced, is we're doing a podcast that's authentic to us and that we actually care about. I don't think I could go on and, I don't know, talk about cars or something to that effect. This is a podcast that we're into, that we appreciate, that we understand. So I totally agree with where you're saying about talking about something that you're passionate about, that you're into, and actually you have something to talk about. Otherwise you are going to end up looking like a donut and it is uncomfortable. But I kind of had an epiphany when you were talking, and I think it's because it's been normalised that a lot of the podcasts that I've done recently with other people, they're always wanting to video record.
It really winds me up.
And then I get like the double chin complex and the do I look all right, instead of just having a chat, which is what we're able to do here in a comfy way.
Well, I think it's also that maybe post-COVID thing of, because everything is virtual, you almost miss out on that connection. And I think it comes across really well. And I hear a lot of people say this to us as feedback is, oh, you can tell you really get on with each other. And I think that's because we're sitting across from each other and I'm looking at you and I'm talking to you. And I understand that sometimes logistically it's a lot easier to do it remotely, but it's something we've really, I think, prided ourselves on with our brand, is that it is really authentic and warm. And I don't think we would get that doing it remotely.
Agreed. And the technology quality, oh my goodness.
Well, and that's the other thing, is you can obtain microphones off kind of digital marketplaces for not a lot of money that are of a sufficient standard. But to go back to your point, laptop webcams are not flattering. They choose the worst angle with that slight looking up at you. And even if you kind of put it up, it never gives you a favourable outcome. And I think, to go back to your point, is listening to your podcast on the way to work, to recording today, there is a warmth and authenticity, but I also know the depths you two go through to organise your diary to ensure that you do it properly. And I think it's very easy to say, oh, I'm free next Tuesday, let's just jump on a Zoom call or a Teams call and record it and put that out. And I think that will be reflected in your effort in trying to arrange things, is reflected in the quality of what you record. So when you take the time to organise your diaries and get behind microphones in a room together like you two do, that's where the best results come from. And I think you listen to these podcasts that are, let's do it next week on a laptop and we'll just fit in this 45 minutes. You don't get that kind of connection that you two bring to the microphones.
On that, and I guess on a slight sidetrack, and I think we have touched on it sort of off mic, what are your opinions on the sort of briefing people versus not briefing people? Because we do a lot of preparation for this podcast in making sure that everyone's comfortable and aware, and we put together a bit of a running order. But actually, I think sometimes the conversation flows very naturally. So do you think people should script their podcasts or overly prepare their guests, or do you think it's better when it's just natural?
It is interesting because our briefing call was really eye-opening to me. The way that I do it personally is I do a lot of research into my guests that I bring on, and I also do it around subjects which are of interest to our client and our audience base. But I don't brief them in the way that you do because I want authentic answers as they're asked. And so I don't want them coming with pre-rehearsed kind of answers like a politician might do to kind of give it that authentic feel. But that's not to say that is the only way to do it, because I know how much work you two put into organising this podcast and the run sheets and the briefing calls. And then to give someone a bit of preparation, this might be touching on something a bit later in the podcast, but it will also give them that kind of reassurance that they're not just kind of being dropped in a studio and having to speak about something kind of, oh, I've got to answer that. How do I do that? So there is that side of that preparation and putting into it. And to go back to the point of organising diaries, that kind of luck favours the prepared. You will get the best outcomes from the better preparation. So it just depends how you choose to do it.
I think it's tricky as well when you're doing the podcast of whether you're doing it in a personal way or from a professional perspective. So a lot of the time I feel that we've had to prepare as an Amelia and I, because we're talking in a corporate or to a person that's representing potentially an organisation.
Yeah.
So they have to do the hoop jumping and show, this is what I shall talk about. And I shall not slag off my organisation. So they have to go through all those conversations beforehand, and having the briefing doc and having that conversation creates almost like a safe space. But there is something nice about being able to rock up to a podcast and just talk as you as it comes out. We're kind of in that middleman space, I think, aren't we?
I will say on that point, though, having done a panel this week where I was given the questions but didn't prepare, I was tenfold more nervous for that than I think I ever have been for any podcast record. And so I think, and that was the first time I had spoken as a subject matter expert in cybersecurity sort of publicly. So I would say that I think the benefit is if you're someone who's inexperienced in doing this, and it is a weird environment. If you've never done it before, sort of sitting in a booth is quite strange. So I think there's benefit to having information, but not having too much information. And I think we encourage our guests to consider the questions, but not prepare for them.
Yeah, agreed. Right, should we jump into the next one that's come through? We have had a question for you, Callum. So, from one of our listeners, I've been asked onto a podcast, but I am terrified. I don't want to look stupid. How can I overcome these fears?
I think the first thing is to congratulate yourself on being invited on a podcast. It shows that they've identified you as a person of significance and of worthy of being within that conversation, to be honest. So first thing, give yourself a pat on the back and give yourself a break. That's a good achievement, a really great achievement. The way to do it is to prepare. So I would always listen to that podcast quite a few episodes before to understand the presenter's style, what kind of questions they ask, what other people have spoken about, how they've spoken about it. So it gives you some context. I think that's the first thing to do. And if you've been invited on that podcast, you've probably listened to it or are aware of it already. The other thing is when you're first doing the engagement of I've been invited on, go through and ask them what's going to be expected of me and what's your process. So I think that's the key, is that before you get to the recording, you need to go through, like you two do, a briefing document. This is what our podcast is about. This is what we're looking to achieve from this podcast. So that give yourself context and prepare for it. So you don't have to sit there and go, I've got to write out my questions. But once you prepare and give yourself context, it's that self-reassurance of knowing what you're going to talk about. And there is just a thing of sometimes you just got to take a deep breath and go, yeah, let's just do it. And sometimes that stuff you're really that gives you a bit of fear. You've just got to take a deep breath and go for it. And what comes out the other side is amazing. And you've just got to take that kind of leap of faith and do it.
I think, like you said, when you are invited, it's highly unlikely that you've been picked out of thin air. Like, you're being asked for a purpose. And so to remember that is really important. And I think the other piece to remember, and we've spoken about it before, is considering what is the worst that can happen. If it is that much of an absolute shocker, it doesn't go anywhere.
I think to say with that, it doesn't go anywhere. And so sitting behind the glass is Brian, one of our audio engineers. I have sat in here many times when we've been launching our own podcasts, rewriting scripts, re-recording them, and it's taken me hours, and he's had to coach me through it because I'm not a professional voice artist. I'm not an actor. I'm not a well-versed podcaster, but anyone can get behind a microphone and talk. And that's the beauty of podcasts. It's not meant to be this crystal, perfectly finished audio piece. It's an authentic conversation around an important subject that you, like you said, has been invited on. And it does take a couple of goes, and you need a bit of coaching through. But what happens is that audio goes. How many times have you taken a selfie, but there's 50 others on your phone that never saw the light of day?
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with recording a podcast. You get dropped in, people fall over their words, people need to start again. It happens. And what you hear is the finished presentation, but it does take a lot of work to get there. So don't be sitting there thinking, I've been invited on this podcast, I can't make any mistakes, because that's not true.
Yeah, I think the thing that resonates with me is you'd be so surprised how flexible everyone else is. Like, I had this misconception, and I went on a well-established podcast recently, and it was recorded with audio and video, and I got sent the video and I was mortified. The angle was off. I was so nervous. It was about 30 degrees when we did it. So I was also, like, my hair was getting progressively more frizzy. And I called the host and I said, I'm really sorry, but could we just do it with the audio? My body language was off. I was uncomfortable. And she was lovely. She was so understanding. And so I think asking for accommodations or asking for a bit of flexibility, no one's going to shout at you. I think that goes back to that thing of what's the worst that can happen. The answer is probably no. When we've had it, when guests have asked, can I stand up? Can I sit down? There are a lot of different ways to feel more comfortable in that environment. But I think the bottom line is, if you have something to say, you won't sound stupid. If you have perspective, you won't sound stupid. Not everyone has to agree with your perspective, but that's still your own and that's still valuable.
And I think to add on that, go back to the point of reviewing the audio or video before it gets released.
Yeah.
I think you're well within your right to go to the producers and say, I'm very happy to do this podcast, but you're not allowed to release it until I give approval. And you can always go back to them and make amendments. I would like this bit taken out. I don't actually, I know I said that on this podcast, but I want to retract that. And that's the way that we do it with our podcast, is we always send the audio to the guest before it goes live, so that they have the opportunity to say, actually, I no longer feel that that's relevant or should be in the podcast. So kind of taking control of it as well, of knowing that there are steps to kind of make sure that you'll be okay once it gets put out there. But these are all worst case scenarios. The whole podcasting is quite fun. It's quite nice to sit in the studio and talk about stuff that you know about. So also don't be scared of it, kind of enjoy it, look forward to it. It's a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that on the train on the way in, that it's so funny that we've somehow sort of made a bit of a business out of just talking to each other, which is something we would do ordinarily and something we do far too often, if you ask our other halves. But I honestly think it's one of those things that you just have to go for it. I don't think anyone is naturally good at this. I think you can become better at it over time. But if you've been asked to do it, and you don't like it, as you say, it doesn't have to go anywhere, but at least you've had that experience of being on a podcast. And it is fun. I think you're right, Callum. It's fun to do something a bit different. And for the majority of us, this is something completely different to what we do in our day-to-day lives.
I think to add on to that, the fun experience, it's also if you go back to what makes a good podcast, creating the environment that brings in the enjoyment to it. And I think the reputation of the presenters and the subject, and then bringing them into a safe space. I think that's the thing, is some people might want to go to a London studio, saw neon lights on Tottenham Court Road. Wow, this is really cool. But the occasion might get to them. And one of the things about our studio out here in Reading is we get a lot of celebrities coming in here because it's discreet. People don't know. It's down in a basement, so that you don't get the kind of buzz or anything. And it's a safe space that these people can record away from the kind of hustle and bustle of everything else that comes. And that allows them to open up and speak how they want to. We had, quite a few years ago, had the Hairy Bikers come in here.
Did you?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they did one. And this was talking about podcasts before podcasts were a kind of mainstream thing. And they were doing something around the kind of Reading area and came in and were in here. And their podcast was great because they were away from where they were known, and we had a younger crowd that knew who they were but weren't kind of big fans of theirs because they just didn't know their stuff. So they could just come in here really comfortably. They weren't bothered and just get on and do a really good podcast because it was a safe space and environment for them to record without distraction. So I think that's the other thing of making a good podcast, is making it a space where people feel comfortable to speak openly and freely.
I will say that's one thing I do love about coming here. And just to confirm, this is not a sales pitch. But to go somewhere that is removed from the noise and even just the travel. So to be able to almost decompress, get in the zone as I make my way here, instead of being like, right, I've got to go through London, into the middle of London with all the human beings. It's quite nice to have that process and that builds up. And like you said, to come somewhere that I trust and I do feel safe here. So, but well done to you for actually making it like that and making it a place that I think we can come and we can be ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think there's the pressure of being in London. And I say that as someone who lives in London and has enjoyed that, but it feels very corporate. And when I've had to go in to record podcasts or videos or anything like that, you do feel that really corporate sense of structure. Whereas here, if we need 5 minutes to go for a walk, it's there. If someone's having a bad day, it's fine. There's no judgment, which is really nice. But moving on to our next question. Obviously, podcasting can be expensive and equipment can be expensive. Studio time can be expensive. So what I'm wondering, I guess, is do you have any recommendations for people who are looking to make the most of their time in a booth or when recording at home to make sure that they're getting the most out of their podcasting experience?
The first thing I think, if you're going to take that step and go make a podcast, is obviously do all your preparation. You've decided on a subject, what you're going to talk about, all those kind of things, is do a pilot. So before you go book a booth, before you go invest in a microphone, there are, like your laptops or your phone, or there's loads of recording devices around that you can record a pilot. Now, it's not going to be great audio, but it will allow you to practice and actually hear what it's going to be like. And I think that would be the best way, is doing a first episode where you can hear it and then go, oh, actually, yeah, that I know how that works now. Because I remember after doing the first pilot podcast we did, I then had an outside guest coming on and it made it 10 times easier because I knew what I was going to do, but how it sounded, how it kind of came back. So I think that's the first thing, is test before you invest. So I would say that most studios, from ours to ones in London to around, you're looking at anywhere between £50 for a lesser known, like per hour, for a lesser known studio, all the way through to, I think there's some in central London that start from about £250 an hour.
Ooh,
so
not cheap.
Breathing.
It's not cheap, but it's obviously, there's certain things you pay for, central London rent and so forth, but studios will range, I would say, anywhere between 50 to 250 an hour. You could probably pick up a half decent microphone off Amazon to plug into your laptop for probably about 150, 200 quid. I think for the kind of bottom line of things, that would sound acceptable. A little pro tip: if you're ever recording at home, put a duvet over your head.
I've heard about this, to soundproof.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, make sure there's no kids at home. That was going to be the tip.
I've got a funny story about that. We did a live directed recording session, and we had a globally renowned airline and their director of marketing and all those kind of people on the call. And this was for their next global advert, and we're doing it in loads of languages. And they really wanted to record this one voice artist, and she thought her baby was going to be asleep, so she scheduled it for when the nap schedule was. And being a parent yourself, you know that whenever you need a child to go for sleep, and that was it. So she was trying to record with the baby kind of crying and screaming in the background and stuff like that. So yeah, make sure there's kind of no children around or outside audio distractions. That is, make sure you are somewhere that is soundproof, that people aren't going to walk in. A lot of people do it in a bathroom because there's less windows or there's smaller windows. And you can shut the door and say, I'm busy in there. And I know it sounds a bit, you're looking at me.
We're all looking a bit strangely.
If you're looking to try and do a bedroom podcast or something before you even go and book, those are the kind of things, really simple, cost-effective ways to get up and running. But I think if you're like yourselves and you're doing this professionally, find a space which resonates with you or allows you to be authentic and have that kind of coffee shop style conversation.
Yeah.
If you are in central London and there's a tube strike and you're trying to get to there and you turn up and it's been raining and you just got off a sweaty tube and you've only got an hour to get in the studio and do it, it's going to have a knock-on effect. So give yourself more time as well. I would probably say a half an hour conversation could take anywhere between an hour to an hour and 45 minutes to record.
The tube strike thing hits really hard today.
Yes.
After it took me nearly 3 hours to get here. I think this is quite similar to what we've written about in our book, Securely Yours, available on Amazon. But we talk about this similarly with events and when you're going to networking, that preparation is not just done when you're there. I think, knowing the environment, researching the environment, listening to other podcasts that have perhaps been recorded there, or if you're going on someone else's podcast, listening to their podcast in advance, I think is really important. And it also helps you to know what's available to you in terms of facilities or resources, because there's nothing worse than being time pressured. And we're very lucky we've never had that here. So we know that, okay, if we run over a little bit, it's completely fine. Or if we need to chop and change things, it's completely fine. And I think that relationships building part is really key as well. We do well here because we really like everyone here and everyone makes us feel very comfortable. So I think there is probably a lot you can do for yourself outside of the room where it happens in order to feel a bit more comfortable.
I think it's important as well to recognise that, again, if you're invited on, you're not obligated. You don't have to do it. If you genuinely aren't comfortable, if you've listened to the podcast and it's not your thing, you don't have to do it. Do it because you want to do it. Do it because you're excited to do it, or because it maybe opens a door to being able to do something else. But don't feel that pressure. And like we've said, do the research beforehand. Figure out who it is, where they are, what even like the journey is going to be like. Is it going to be a pain? So you're going to turn up already traumatized, or is it quite relaxed? Should you build in a coffee break when you get there so you can go in feeling positive and energized? All these kinds of things are the prep before that mean you can go in there and be yourself and be comfortable.
I think that's something that I haven't spoken about, but you've hit the nail on the head. Is we've spoken about preparation and run sheets and certain scripted parts and the format of the conversation. But actually, I'd say the 15 minutes before you have the recording is really important for the host and the guest, that you turn up, you're not flustered, you can shake off the journey and sit down and have a coffee. I usually take good 10, 15 minutes with my guests just speaking upstairs, having a coffee, almost relaxing them into the conversation. So when we go in the booth, we're already going through the conversation and it makes them feel more at ease. And it also kind of makes everyone else feel, okay, yeah, let's go and have a really good conversation rather than trying to shake off tube strikes or anything like that. So that's also a really key part. It's the 15 minutes beforehand in just kind of being able to take a breath and go, all right, I'm ready for this.
I always encourage people when they're doing, and you might laugh at this, when they're doing something that scares them, to have like a walkout song, like they do in boxing. But if there is a song that makes you feel really hyped, I will like listen to that before I go in to do something important. And it sounds really silly, but it does really psych you up for it. And I think we're probably past the point of that now, because all we need to do is see each other and we're automatically at 100. But things like that, which sound really silly, and I think we've spoken before about power poses and that kind of thing. Yeah. But I think it's just doing what you need to do to get you to that point of feeling comfortable. Even if it's a bit silly, that actually quite breaks the ice.
Whatever it takes. Although you saying that, it does... Shame. It does remind me. So I spoke at a conference once and I chose Bulletproof. Is it LaRue that wrote? Yeah. But they ended up playing it so loud. And for whatever reason, that Theresa May clip where she walks out like a robot?
The ABBA one.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm like walking up to the stage like that. Oh, I don't know why I did it. I just froze in the moment. So I get having like, I was going to say a theme tune, but doing what it takes to make you feel comfortable, but just make sure it definitely does make you comfortable and not doubt yourself as a person.
I think play that music before you walk in your home door, your front door at home, and do it, because then if you feel a bit silly doing that, then but you're right. Anyway, Brian, can you put Eye of the Tiger on when there's my introduction on?
Just to as well reflect on something Callum said earlier, if you are going to record your podcast in a bathroom, make sure that it is just the audio, because otherwise you're going to scare people that they think you're sat on the toilet. And moving on to another question. So again, we've had another one come in. I've been on a podcast, but I'm unhappy with the content and I don't know how to express my concern to the owner. We've kind of touched on this already, but what should they do? What can they say?
I think you need to have an honest conversation. And I always think if you start anything with hostility, it's never going to go well, because it puts that person on the back foot. I think openly explaining, and to go back to one of your podcasts, and a great takeaway is the kind of compliment sandwich that you've spoken about before, is I really enjoyed being on your podcast. I had such a great time, and thank you for inviting me on. However, I'm really not happy with the outcome and I don't want this to go public. And then say, perhaps we could go record it again at another time. So I think it is, you said, it's that compliment sandwich of making them feel good, and you want to do it, but sometimes the outcome isn't what you wanted, and you have to be honest and go through that dialogue, because the worst thing that could happen is you don't say anything and it goes out and it has a negative reaction that you were worried about. So it just got to be brave and speak up and say, actually, I don't think this is right. And then if that does go up, then I think you've got a bit more of a journey of getting to a resolution.
And I think that's where we all need to remember that when you're doing a podcast, you as a person are the priority. Yes, you're recording it with another person. Yes, maybe you're a guest. But that podcast going out impacts you as a person, maybe professionally, maybe your future opportunities. So if it doesn't sit comfortably, you have to protect yourself and you have to protect your own identity. So saying, I'm not happy, I'm not comfortable, the host should be open to that. If they're not, that's maybe a separate media conversation to be had. Maybe if it is corporate, that's where you might have a little chat with maybe a legal or HR team, especially if there's been any cheeky contracts done beforehand. But prioritise yourself. Prioritise how it makes you feel when you listen to it. If you're happy, great. If you're uncomfortable, please say something.
I think those conversations are challenging. And as I said earlier, having done that recently, I was so embarrassed. I think that was the optimal thing, was that I thought, like, you're an adult, grow up. Like, you're just being vain. If you don't like how you look, it's not the end of the world. But actually, I think that we've all had feelings of being insecure, and I think that resonates with people. And I also, it's really easy in the moment to say things and think, oh, why did I say that? I said on a podcast the other day that we like hated each other or something. I didn't mean to. It just sort of came out in the wrong way. But you sort of laugh you laugh it off and it's funny. And I think that goes back to the piece of things being natural, is we all slip up and we all say things that are maybe a little bit wrong and we correct ourselves. But I find, and I'm sure you both find, that when I listen to a podcast and it's completely perfect, it's quite boring. It's nice to have those little moments of, oh, I didn't mean that. Oh, I didn't mean to say that, or stumbling on your words. And, you know, there is the thing of you can always stop and take a breath and carry on. But I don't think people listening tend to view these things as microscopically as you do as the person who's done the podcast.
Yeah, it is about being human. And again, just taking it down a slightly corporate pathway again. I have had it many times where I've done a podcast, I then need to send it to like the PR team or marketing to review it. And I quite often have to go back and say, can we tweak this? We need to remove this because maybe if we take it to cybersecurity, the threat has changed since then, or that's not relevant anymore. So again, whoever's hosting, whoever owns that podcast should be quite comfortable with that and should be open to that. If they're not, hopefully you would know beforehand, because they're the kinds of questions you should be asking. If they're not, again, maybe, as I said, that's a meatier conversation for later.
I think the other thing is the context of what the podcast is. Is it a big, well-known podcast? Is it around really sensitive questions and subjects? Then I think the pre-preparation, the communication beforehand, knowing what the questions are, preparing yourself, speaking with your legal or HR or marketing team before that is really key. If it is more just a chat about what you think your local football team are like at the moment, then there's not that kind of pressure. So I think the context is king. The other thing is that if you are being invited on these high-level podcasts with really sensitive questions, I would probably think it's not going to be your first time on a podcast. And if it is, then fair play to you. But
in the deep end.
Yeah. And I think from knowing and watching people on podcasts, people do build up to these much bigger things. So we all listen to the high-level podcasts. There are the kind of much more in-between ones as well, where it's not so sensitive. So don't scare yourself off with that kind of thing. But I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
That you've got to do what's best for you.
Thank you. Lots of amazing questions today, and I've very much enjoyed hearing your answers. Thank you, Callum, for your openness and honesty. You can check Callum out on LinkedIn or by visiting the studio's website, which is matinee.co.uk.
Remember, if you want to record a podcast or be a guest on one, do it in a way that feels comfortable, but more importantly, feels authentic to you. Do that prep, be open about what you need. And like we've said, most importantly, please breathe. I've learned today about not holding my breath in front of the podcast mic. You can do this. It's just about creating a safe space that's right for you and what you need.
So to end, if you have any other questions relating to podcrafting or any other topic we speak about on this podcast, pop them through to us at cyberagonyaunts@gmail.com and we'll do our best to reply there, or maybe even cover it in a future podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others or post about it on social media using the hashtag CyberAgonyAunt.
As always, a huge thank you to our guests, to Matinee Multilingual, and to you, our listeners. Keep smiling, keep shining, and we'll see you next time on the Cyber Agony Aunts podcast.